On this episode of the I2I Forum podcast, we're speaking with Mike Roe from Tensense.ai. Mike is going to tell us about his journey from being a police officer all the way to heading up an IT software company, and how the software at Tensense.ai can help you as a leader get deeper insights into how you can manage, lead, and successfully deliver change in your organization. All this and more on the I2I Forum podcast. Good afternoon, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Marcellus. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. Now, for those who don't know you, if you just want to tell me a bit about yourself, or tell them a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure can. So, Mike Roe, I am the chief executive of a company called Tensense.ai, and I have been doing that now for quite some time. It's over 10 years, and it's been quite a journey. But no, it's been brilliant. And prior to that, I was a police officer. So quite how I ended up being a police officer and being the CEO of a tech company, who knows?
So what was that journey then? So you were doing police work, and I guess it just expanded, or did you come across an opportunity, or?
Yeah, I guess you'd say that the opportunity hit me. So I've been a detective for pretty much all of my police career. Which ends up having some connections between what I'm doing now in terms of curiosity and asking questions and helping organisations. But for the last 7 years, I was the police commander in Bristol. And towards the end of that time, I was introduced to the founder of the company that I'm now the CEO of. But in those days, it was a leadership and mentoring company, which I kind of understood what that was about. And anyway, he invited me to join a mentoring group. So for the first time in my career, I had somewhere I could go where you could really share your stuff. And so I joined that group in Bath. And a long story cut short, a business grew out of that group, which involved the founder going off and being the CEO of. So he asked me if I would jump from my cozy public sector pension and run what was then called Foot Down. And the reason behind the name was how can you help organizations and leaders put their foot down and accelerate their performance? But as I say, long story cut short, we morphed into a consultancy because we'd always had a diagnostic tool. In fact, I used an early iteration when I amalgamated Bristol. So we went from a kind of leadership mentoring company to a consultancy with a cool tool to then eventually in about 2016, we realized that actually we were a tech company. Yeah. That the passion was to help leaders and organizations be the best they could be. But our role in the world was to use our tech to do the heavy lifting and to help leaders get to where they wanted to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sense. In fact, one of the things that I found as a recurring theme when I'm speaking to a number of people, like the practical approach that I use, is to go, that makes sense. But it makes sense after I've gone through specific steps with them.
Yeah.
And that's why I like the whole thing of the 10 cents in the sense of, or what you're calling sense making, because it helps break it down so it does make sense to the people in the organizations.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that the key thing about Tensense was when I got together with a guy called Dr. Mike Carter. So Mike is our chief scientist, but Mike is an exponent of sense making. And I could tell you a little bit about that if you thought that was...
Oh, no, useful. Please.
So, I mean, sense making goes back, to the late 60s, really. Developed by a guy called Carl Weick in the US. And at its core, sense making is how do we as humans pick up those clues and signals from around us every day? How do we create meaning so that we can make decisions and take action? And you'd have to argue, I think you'd argue, that it's been very prescient over the last few years. So Mike and a few colleagues have been lecturing and researching sense making for many years. Mike taught on the MBA program at Bath and was involved in research projects. So if you take tragedies and disasters, and as we're speaking today, there's just been one in America with the air crash in Washington, whether that's the Challenger disaster, Bhopal, Tenerife air disaster, hospital disasters. Mike's own contribution was the shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes in London. And the importance of this is that often when bad things happen, it's made worse by the involvement of humans. And I think the important thing here is to, in a minute, I'll bring the threads back to business and organizations now, because hopefully people don't die in business in the way that these disasters unfold, but businesses do. And so what they were able to do is deconstruct these events, reconstruct them to extract the learnings, as opposed to let's just apportion blame for that happening. So when we were looking at how we wanted to help leaders and organizations, and we had an early version of a diagnostic, Mike took the view, and we all agreed, that underpinning it by sense making would be a very powerful thing to do for leaders, because the rule book for leaders in the last few years has been thrown out the window. The old frames of reference, I've got a bunch of books behind me, but they are in some ways redundant because the complexity and the challenges now are so different. So sense making helps leaders just take that kind of pause, reflection. And so at its core, sense making is, what's the story here? What do I do next? And so Mike has brought utility to the science of sense making by building the diagnostic, which is now front and center of our business.
So what is it that it does then? You say it's a diagnostic. What is it that it does?
So we were looking for, well, if you take the example of the big four or big consultancies, their traditional model has been, yes, we can help, and we will send our 30 graduates with clipboards into the business to immerse themselves in the business and tell you what needs to be done. So on one level, a very successful methodology. Or you might have a particular issue and you want a big research program that an academic institution does. Our view was there's a different way. And so what we were looking for was, what would be the fewest number of clues we could ask an organization that will give a leader the biggest insight into what was happening? Not at a level of precision, but at a level of plausibility. There is a guy called Stephen Kelly, who used to be the chief executive of Sage and worked for government organizations. And he was an alumni of Bath University. And he would come and speak to the students, and he would give his little nuggets. And one of his nuggets was, ambiguity is the enemy of execution. And if you think about that, that is what we were trying to help leaders with. You have all of this stuff to do. You have a whole bunch of stuff that may be getting in the way of the business. But if we could just point you to the 2 or 3 critical areas and do that regularly, then you've got a good chance of staying ahead of the game. So in some ways, what we've built is a failure avoidance system. And we say that unashamedly. We've got a CEO who's now using us in his 4th company, and Nigel will say that it's what you don't know that hurts you. It's what's really going on that you need to know. It's what's going to come in and blindside you. And actually, Marcellus, it's the people that know that. Whether it's the Volkswagen scandal or Boeing, the people know. So unlike an engagement survey or customer feedback, we tap into the semantic of what people really know is happening in their bit of the business. So it acts as an early warning system. So 16 clues asked every month becomes data that you can start to predict performance with.
So now that the data is there, who's working with this? So do they need some PhD scientists to help them decipher what this all, it all means, what to do and how it works? How does it work?
No, not at all. Because if I can do it, I'll say anybody can. It was designed. Mike sometimes uses it's simple, not simplistic. And so 16 questions get translated into a dashboard. There are 4 lenses. Imagine this is your car. So when you get in your car, you're glancing down, or an aircraft for that matter, there are some critical dials. And our critical dials are, where do people think the performance energy is in this business? Because if they think we're in success, and we are, that requires different leadership, a different hand on the tiller. But if we're flipped over and we're in challenge or failure, that's a different place to be. That's lens number 1. You'd be able to visualize that. Lens number 2 is motivation. It's a reflection of leadership. Where people feel they're invested in and challenged and supported, you get high commitment. So imagine a lens and you're in high commitment. Brilliant. Keep the journey going. The third one is team attributes. Do we have the skills, the resilience, the characteristics to deliver the project or deliver the mandate? And again, you'd see the lens and you'd go, okay. Now it's all about culture, but the fourth one is the culture climate. So this is where, as leaders, we can test the behaviors, the values, our leadership style. So those 4 lenses are our dashboard. The 16 questions connect, obviously using AI now to provide a report. But then we put our data onto the business intelligence environment. And this is where it becomes even more powerful, because this is where you spot trends and patterns. So we have a client where the CTO now says, you can now help me predict my profitability in 2 months' time. 16 questions. Mm-hmm. And Toby said, he said, how they get such insights from 16 questions, I don't know, but they do. And that's the clever bit. Nothing to do with me, all down to Mike Carter and the work he did with Bath University. So hopefully that answers your question. And that's why the bit to add is, it is intuitive. It is all about encouraging leaders to be curious and ask questions. So so they don't need the consultant. They may have a consultant who helps them with interventions, but they can look at the dashboard, look at the report, and get curious. Why is that bit of my business look like it's smouldering or not working as well as that bit? Because the world needs, in my humble opinion, leaders who are prepared to be curious and vulnerable. And I don't mean vulnerable, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Vulnerable, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. What am I not hearing?
Mm-hmm. See, what I like about that is one of the challenges that we have within the change management community, from my perspective, and I've only been doing this 30 years, is we have project managers that are not trained on the change aspect. And I mean deeply trained, not a chapter in a module for 30 minutes in their training, but I mean trained like how I had to go through 5 days of training just on one particular methodology. But then we have the days that I do of training on change that they didn't do a real rigored view of the delivery. So trying to get these 2 areas to meet, and the area that they don't meet very well right now, and I think is this particular thing is undermining the credibility of the entire discipline of change, is metrics, numbers, and tangible things beyond the hit and miss experiential. Yeah. So for me, with my decades in delivery before moving into change, I was always looking for a way to say, how can I demonstrate pounds, pence, dollars, cents, which I can typically get from time. I can also get from, if I can get this whole thing of measuring people's perceptions, because if people perceive that we're doing badly and the messages out there saying that we're doing awesome, that disconnect is why people are leaving the organization. Yeah. That disconnect is why people are not attending meetings, because they don't see it as a priority, although it's the most powerful, important thing in the business, but everybody realizes that's not what I'm seeing. That's not the perception. So having tools like this and having this in my toolkit is a way for me to be able to demonstrate and show in practical terms. That makes sense.
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, you've just done my sales pitch, really. But that's why calling it a failure avoidance framework. Some people might go, "Oh my God," but you will probably remember Accenture have just produced a 49-page report on change and why it fails and what needs to happen. I think there's a startling stat that 70% fail, and of course it is down to people like your good self, who can hold their hand, a trusted advisor, but it's also about leaders. But what we want to provide is the ability to measure that transformational change, that ability to be able to go, look, we can take a very quick scan. What's the story here? Which will tell you how to implement, which levers to pull if you want this change program to be successful. So we are passionate about, I use the phrase, I just want to be disproportionate value.
Yeah.
So that organizations can deliver this, whatever it might be that they're trying to deliver. And I think our 16 questions joined up and connected tell a very powerful story.
Well, this works well for me because the other podcasts that people can check out to kind of get under the covers on this is my podcast with Dominic Kitchen, who's a customer psychologist and customer experience expert, as well as one that I recently did with a communications expert.
Yeah.
Because part of the challenge that we also have here is that the 16 questions, as an example, how can you get so much from? So Dominic, I worked with him with a particular company, startup, and they were looking at spending like £40,000 on developing this software and blah, 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 blah. Website. And so we brought him in and he did 10 questions.
Right.
Sent it out nationally. And when they came back, he was basically said to them, here's what to do. Number one, the points that you are putting out there as your proposition, out of the 6 of them, only these 3 matter and in this order. That means whatever they say is going to actually land better with their audience.
Yeah.
Don't go live with the full website of £40,000 because I know it's a strain. You just need a mobile website that we can get done for under $4,000. Yeah. Target your social media instead of doing 100,000 people, do 10,000 people in this region of the country. And also, I see he said, use this particular color and make the call to action button on the left-hand side of the screen. And they're like, what? And he explained, the people in this area of the country, he did 2 questions, like, when was the last time you promoted something that you really liked? Right? And how likely are you to promote something you like? As 2 separate questions, but he knows the correlation of the people in the London area who they were going to focus on. They said that they're likely to do it, but the last time they did it was a year ago. The people in the North said that they're not as likely to do it, but they've done it within the last month. So they're hard to convince, but when they convince, they speak quickly. They share quickly. Yeah. He also said do the mobile device, because the fact that most of them weren't using laptops or desktops, because most of them, the industry they were in, were using their mobile phones. And then he said, make the call to action button on the left-hand side of the screen, because typically most people are right-handed, and it means they didn't have to move their thumb to an awkward position to do the call to action. Yeah. All of that from 10 questions. So that psychology, which is built in because of the doctoral level people that you're working with, I understand it, but people can't always appreciate it. But sometimes I use an example like that. Yeah. So the other point I think that is quite interesting for us to consider too is before you land and before I land and come here and use a tool like Tensense or recommend it to an organization, there are a few things that I know that need to be in place. From your perspective, what's an ideal situation? What should a company have in place as far as maybe the way that their data looks or the team that needs to work on this?
Well, not a great deal, to be honest. I mean, I think there'll be 2 things, certainly. One, it's a big enough organization, because often now it's harder for CEOs to get their hands around the organization to really know what's going on, particularly as some of the water cooler moments have dissipated. So, it's an organization of a real size, but with a CEO who has a passion to improve, who, she or he don't necessarily think they have got everything sorted, because let's be fair, who has, and who are, willing to, be curious. And so if those things are in place, that's great. Curious leaders, pretty crucial for us. Life's too short to work with people who, and there's only been two in 10 years where they would say, no, bring it on. We want to know what's really going on. But when you show them the results, it's clear they don't really want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I remember once sitting in a boardroom where the CEO had been espoused that kind of, desire, showed the results. 9 people are going, yeah, that's us. And he's going, so that doesn't work. But in a more serious point, where organizations have got a business intelligence environment, we operate a bit like an API company. We just suck up our Tensense data onto the BI environment. And of course, it will give you can mash it with other data and it gives you that predictive view of performance. So that's pretty powerful. But even putting the results on a flip chart, it's about where are the threats, where are the opportunities, where are the risks, and we want to get ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. And so in many ways, Marcellus, the data for us is most data most of us ever collect is rear view mirror. It's happened. Mm-hmm. We want to give something that allows for that front view, if you will, of the organization.
See, so one of the things, and I saw the strategy, how you moved into being more software focused, and then kind of expanding your reach by working through consultants and consultancies like we're working together. And I actually admire that, and I like that, because what it means is that we're now a network and partnership where you're doing your specialty, I'm doing mine. And so I'm kind of, in some ways, making the introduction or pointing people your way as a trusted partner, but also kind of making sure that things are as they could be, or both people know how it's supposed to be, in the sense of, so the key information that I found that's most important for organizations to have is, first of all, whether it's an Active Directory, AD, or a list of their employees that is regularly maintained. Because this way we know who we're sending it to and we know information about them to more easily segment.
Yeah,
so absolutely. Like you said, I've seen you guys, or I've heard from the conversations about you guys adapting to organizations. What I seek to do as a contractor consultant is spend a few days or maybe a week or so actually making sure that they've done the pre-work. So when Tensense lands, you get to show those results quickly, because the last thing they want to do is spend 3-4 weeks trying to get one survey out.
No, you're absolutely right. And it reminds me, we worked with a consultancy that had the gig to do the transformational change program for the National Forensic Science Service. And traditionally, they would do a whole set of qualitative interviews. What we're able to do is to hone where those qualitative interviews should take place. So you've got to understand the structure. And of course, we can segment, and this is the power really, function, geography, hierarchy, time spent in the business, gender, whatever. Because what
as long as they collect it first to give it to you.
As long as they give us a spreadsheet with that detail, then we can give to you. There you go, Marcellus. That would appear to be where you should probably go and focus your valuable time, coupled with the data, to give you a sense of, okay, what's the story here?
Yeah, completely agree. I like to think of this as one of my tools, because I think to one of the projects that I was tenuously connected to, kind of at arm's length, was a rail project. And one of the things that they were doing there is they sent out these guys to actually do that surveying of the land to make sure where the track is going to go, where they're going to lay the sleepers, how they're going to lay the track to get where they're going to go. And I kind of think of Tensense as one of my tools to be able to understand the terrain that we're going through, so I can have the correct equipment to be able to make sure that we can lay the tracks.
The analogy works, because we've actually just run a pilot with a big rail network, and looking at the performance of their stations. And it's a bit like, I've got quite a big meeting next Tuesday with a big global retailer who want to use us to assess their top 20 performing stores and their bottom 20 performing stores. And of course, this is about them realizing that the Tensense data captures something that nothing else does. And our strong proposition is that if you've got some warnings in the Tensense data, it is going to hit your P&L. May not immediately, but it will do. And so particularly for the consultant, in our view, having that sense of what's the story and then being able to track it. And I think that's important, because, organizations and this particular global company, they want to be able to measure change, measure cultural transformation. So what we can do with our 16 questions, which takes less than 2 minutes to complete, is a monthly pulse that you as the consultant check in on, so that you can adapt and amend and make sure the communication's right, and where do we need to go and apply a bit more effort here, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the partnership for me.
To me, it's that insight
Yes.
to be able to have the data to, as you said, know where to focus my effort. Because I think a lot of organizations, they bring change people in, but because they haven't done this kind of like pre-change
Yeah.
survey, they haven't
Yeah.
surveyed the land, they're
Yeah.
expecting things. In fact, one program manager said to me at one point, 30,000 people in the organization, global organization. I'm speaking to them in August, and despite the kind of general misalignment maybe on understanding what he meant when he said this, he said, I want the business change ready by November. And I'm like, I don't even still have a list of all the 30,000 people segmented to understand all the different areas. The IT department, I have no authority to get that information without somebody basically setting somebody on fire, or with the other priorities. Then on top of that, change ready in the sense of that they're ready to press a button and their training is
He
ready to
meant
begin.
November the following year. I think that's what he meant.
Actually, he didn't, but but that's the kind of thing I think sometimes that misalignment of understanding, but something where I can have the tools and say this area of the country feel this about the very same topic.
Yeah.
So therefore, I can now work with my comms
Yeah.
change and comms lead
Yeah.
to help shape a message to help soften the area there. And then because it's a regular pulse, that's
Yeah.
a structured way with the same questions working with
Yeah.
my business change network, we can gauge how
Yeah.
things are getting aligned and actually graphically see it
Yeah.
on a chart. And
Yeah.
that's the power to me, because that
Yeah.
way, when I say I need to go up north to do this piece of work,
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
understand why
Yeah.
and the implications.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the one thing that I'm always prepared to offer, particularly to people like yourself, experts in the field, is we'll do that initial deployment for free. We'll do
Mm-hmm.
that pilot for free. Because once they've done it, and you've seen the power of it, and the client has, well, we
Mm-hmm.
hope then there's an arrangement and there's a partnership.
Yes.
But it gives you that initial real sense of, okay, are we in good shape here? And then, of course, we believe in our product enough to go, hopefully you'll then go, well, we can't really do without this. So then we earn the right to have another conversation.
And I feel that the tools for insight, whether it's Tensense or Anova or some of the other tools that I use, I think are part of the essential part of the toolkit for
Mm.
change managers,
Mm.
especially for those who are consultant contractors
Sure. Yeah.
who are going in, who don't have the power of a big four behind them where the
Yes,
people are going to give them
exactly.
an endless budget, that they
Yeah.
know they're on a fix, especially outside IR35, if the
Yeah.
organizations are smart enough to do that, because it
Yeah.
means I can bring these tools, these people in,
Yeah.
prove its worth, prove its value,
Yeah.
and then scale it up using my incremental change management
Yeah.
methodology.
Yeah.
So,
As I said earlier, we just want to be disproportionate value to
yes.
what you've just described.
And I think that's a great way to wrap it up right there, Mike. So
Okay.
thank you so much for spending the time to share with me more about Tensense, your history, and all the great things it can do. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys more in the future.
And Marcellus, thanks very much for the opportunity and for the chat. See you
You're
soon.
very welcome. See you.